Hi, everybody. My name is H. Melt. I use they, them pronouns, and I am an employee at Women and Children First Bookstore, who is hosting tonight's poetry reading. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Women and Children First sits is the occupied territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. There are over 75,000 Indigenous people of many nations living in Illinois. We strive to recognize and honor Native histories, literature, and communities, and encourage you to research whose land you're on in your own homes and communities. Women and Children First is now open if you're in Chicago from 12 to 6 on weekdays and 11 to 6 on weekends. We're closed on Mondays. We're also processing a ton of online orders that can be shipped anywhere in the country or picked up in store. And we're hosting a ton of virtual events, much like tonight's reading, which are all listed on womenandchildrenfirst.com. And our next event tomorrow evening is another poetry reading with the amazing Khadijah Queen, who has a new book out with Tin House. So tonight, we're honored to be celebrating a slew of new and upcoming poetry releases, including Arrow by Sumita Chakraborty, My Daily Actions or the Meteorites by Brook Corfman, Hot with the Bad Things by Lucia LoTempio, and the forthcoming Inheritance by Taylor Johnson, which you can pre-order now and releases in November. You can buy the books with the green button at the bottom of your screen, and I'm going to turn it over to our first reader this evening.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Drop it in the chat if you cannot. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and assume I'm not talking into the void any more than usual. All right, thank you so much to Women and Children First, and especially H. Melt for having me and having us. I'm really excited, mostly for the end of mine when I get to sit back and hear the genius of all of the other readers. So without further ado, I like to start my own poetry readings when I can with a poem by someone else. And what I want to read from today is a poem from the book Song by Bridget Paguin Kelly. This book has been important to me for a long time and was especially important to me while writing Arrow. The poem is Field Song by Bridget Paguin Kelly. What stands? The walnut, the tower of story dark with crows, the leafy way station for doomsayers, say nay, say no, say the morning comes in with a silver spoon and the spoon rattles in a cup because the child is gone. But still the child stands the way a statue does in the mind or in a field, a fawn figure with a filigreed grin there beside the walnut and the way of passing things, the wide road down the middle of it all. The middle ground gives way, and we are on either side, as in a game. You're it, you're not, you're out. Arms up. You stand, with those taken for all their worth. The lace of Anne, the rods of gold, the stalks made from iron, their color drains away, but still they hold on, a dry feast. The way things fast toward their absent forms, go in hunger, go in grace. That again was Bridget Paguin Kelly's Field Song. So my book Arrow is basically a story about living in and passing through the aftermaths of various forms of violence. And accordingly, the speaker of the book goes through kind of a range of psychological journeys that involve coping with that violence. And I'll stop fronting for a second. The speaker is me. It's very meaningful to me, especially to be reading at a feminist bookstore, because what this book is largely about is surviving domestic violence and kind of coping with the post-traumatic stress and learning how to live forward after such a traumatic childhood. So many of the poems in the beginning of the book are from a fairly early stage in that process. It's all aftermath, but I would characterize the version of me in the first section of the book as one who still had quite a chip on her shoulder, someone who had only just started to be able to take up space and to be able to yell back, and accordingly tried to do both of those things a lot, and often inappropriately. The first poem, for example, ends with the speaker, aka past me, telling her reader to die over and over again just because she can. So I'm going, and because she's grieving. So there's that too. So I'm going to read a few poems, two poems that are from this beginning section of that book. The first is called Quiver. Speak to me never again about sacrifice. Tell me no stories of things left behind. Should you dream of telling me such a thing, imagine immediately yourself in front of Orpheus. Know that for the rest of my life, I do and will name everything Eurydice, no matter what else I pretend I have named it. I do not know what my own eyes look like, but often I imagine them like the eyes of a hound fresh from the track. The track, too, is Eurydice. Each lover, 3 dogs, rose bushes. My mother, my sister, my home state, an underground bee's nest, one upright black kawaii piano. Here are the words you may not speak to me because I know them better than you could. Toil, sacrifice, hound, Eurydice. So that poem was written shortly after my younger sister died. She died somewhat unexpectedly and somewhat expectedly in 2014. And I say that because she was not ill, but I had spent my entire life due to domestic violence expecting in some ways either her death or my mother's death or even my own. And it's that kind of immediacy of the anguish of that aftermath that fuels the rage in that poem and in this next one, which is one of a few poems in this book titled "O Spirit." To help myself rise in the morning, I make a promise. Someday I will cause as much pain as I feel. Shout out to therapy for making me a better person than that at some point, although it was and remains very much a work in progress. Here's a poem from kind of the middle-ish section of the book, which kind of has, the speaker has transformed a little bit from that raw rage, but still is sort of groping her way forward, as I'm sure I and everyone else will always be. This is another poem called "O Spirit." A bear brings forth her young, informous and unshapen. I now wear the pelt of the conjured beast around my groin. I think of new words for solace, one of which is knifed. We take no form until licked into shape by the tongues of those who love us. All right, how am I doing on time? I think I've got about 4-ish minutes left, something like that. The next poem I'm going to read is a poem that's really in fragments, and how it was written was shortly after my sister died. I really lost the ability to generate language on my own for a decent length of time, and I'm kind of a practical person, and I was in grad school time and I saw the fall calendar approaching and I was like, well, this isn't going to work. I'm going to need to be able to have words coming out of my brain in like at least a vaguely coherent fashion soon. So I started translating Rilke's late French poetry. And I didn't really know what to do with them for the longest time. They were kind of like a battery starter for the linguistic center of my brain. But then after about 2 years had passed, I went back to them and I looked at them and I started pulling out phrases and making erasures out of those translations. And then I strung them together in a poem called Windows. So what you'll hear right here has a bunch of kind of wild associative leaps and not very much of a lyric thread or a narrative thread rather. And it's hopefully fun to listen to. It's always fun to read because I hear a new way through it every single time, which is kind of fun because it's called Windows. Okay. How much loss gains suddenly in emphasis and brilliant sadness, far from that which lives and turns. Languages of our vain comings and goings wilt and gnaw, beat them, punish them for having said and always said, tear out finally our spells. One life pours and grows impatient for another life, and the lovers look on them there, immobile and frail, pinned like the butterflies for the beauty of their wings, too great in the outdoors. Like the lyre, you should be rendered a constellation. Like the scales or the lyre, an almost name of the age's absences. Should I defend myself? Am I not intact? One who loves is never beautiful, tender, strained. All hazards are abolished at the middle of love, with a little bit of space around it where we are the masters, changeable like the sea. Ice, sudden, where our face is mirrored and traversed. Taste of freedom compromised by the presence of fate. For whom would I wait? With this heart all full, which loss completes, will I be found when the night abounds, given over to you, inexhaustible, climb, turn far and away, doubt that you can give the excess which arrests me, the sky, an immense example of depth and height, make of the air a round arena. Effort circumscribes our life enormous, stretched toward the night. What escaped? Set out in type on the page, a little image vague, like the greyhounds arranging their legs. The sense of our rights waits intent. Who rushes, who tilts, who remains after the abandonment of the night? Starry, avaricious, all the grand, unbroken numbers of the night will multiply. New celestial youth, the matutinal sky buckles close under the guise of tenderness. Time uses his jacket. Inconsolable space turned me into wind, placed me in the river, leaves fled. I had drunk all of my abyss. One must not tire and eat with one's eyes. Vision watered profusely, a garden of images, each bird whose flight crosses my expanse. Nothing but looking seems like life to me. Nothing but looking seems like life. While the prunes ripen, oh my eyes, eaters of roses, you will drink the moon. I consent, and I consent. Force, oh, force does not frighten me anymore because it cradles me. In the morning, small while, to become almost a mouth, all worn and bloodless. Be stars, the rhymes found at the ends of end, say enough. And I'll do one last one. It's a short one, and it's the final poem in the book. Thank you so much again for listening. I really appreciate it. This poem is called O. Stars are not the end, but the beginning. A bird is to its throat as a promise is to its sharp edge. I wanted to make for you a sun shower. Instead, I've made for you a mortal thing. Writing is knowing how to cut. There is a space in my body that did not exist when I began this book. It is a window. When I next speak, I will do so through that window. Please leave the window unlatched. When I next speak, it will be with changed lips. I wonder what their color will be. Finally, she enlarges the figure to a gram scale and cuts off its head. Thank you so much.
Hi. I'm Brook Corfman. I'm reading next. One of the differences from Crowdcast to Zoom, I haven't used Crowdcast before, is there's so little feedback. So that's fun and new. Okay, but Sumita, that was amazing. I loved hearing the repetition really play out as you read those poems, really striking to me. I actually also am going to start by reading a poem by someone else. We didn't plan that, but one of the books that was really important to me as I was writing my book was a book by Mei Bersenbrugger called The Heat Bird. And her newest book just got nominated for a National Book Award today. So after that, I thought, well, maybe I'll read the first poem of this book as a kind of homage. It's always kind of risky. I'm impressed that Sumita does it all the time because I'm always like, oh no, what if they like it better than mine? Okay, so this is the first poem, or the first kind of little piece in the book, which is just kind of numbered 1. Never mind if he calls. The places you get through inwardness take time, and to drift down to the shore of the island. You know by the sand moving, even the coarse sand here. It's hard to say if you can even stand up there, but there is blue sky and blue water tipping up the same distance from you as your face. Its face goes further behind the eyes without weight or haze, and the horizon is just a change where from going deep, you go wider, but go. So that's by May Bursenbrugge. That's a book, there's a famous-ish essay about her work that kind of like knocks on that book, and I always have a bone to pick with that essay because I'm like, that book is amazing. Okay, and so then this is my book, My Daily Actions or The Meteorites. I'm gonna read the first poem. Some of you who've heard me read from this before will have heard that poem before. I seem to have become stuck in that with reading with that poem, that it's called Premonition, and it's a kind of invocation maybe. So I'm always reading it at the beginning. Premonition. In the field, hands rise like wildflowers. Each nail painted a bright color: teal, sunflower, tangerine, lapis. From your vessel, dip the paddle to the dirt. It moves as water, a reversed river. A single door, ornate, leads only to the rest of the meadow. When I am alone, I sometimes stand like the women of those worlds which are my own sacred texts. I hold a scepter shaped like a key, turn from the Torah toward a magical girl. A beautiful form appears with a warning. The valley will burn, or the sky will firm as weight. These are not inevitable, but I react to specific demands. For example, let time move forward, never go through the door. So I wait and watch what moves in the meadow. Each step toward or away from the door becomes impossibly detailed. So the book is mostly prose poems, sort of two sections, a section called Meteor, and then a second section called Cold Meteor later in the book. And because the first section was published as a chapbook, which I actually read from, the launch for that was actually at Women and Children First, and another time in person. So this is the chapbook, which has these little cards. And so it became the first section in this book. And it's not actually that different in terms of the language, but the reading experience is pretty different because you can kind of shuffle the cards, or you can take one out and take it with you, and you turn the pages differently. And so it's been quite enjoyable to me to sort of experience the poems in these different kind of modes. But because of that, I'm going to read a little bit from the second section, which is not part of the chapbook, from my book. I think I'm going to read I'll read a couple, and then we'll see how we are in time. A confession of my inadequacy. There is something I love, I want to replicate, but I fear I am succeeding. Circumscribed time balloons. As a car moves through it, the fog condenses to rain. That is the self in the thin statue at the entranceway of bronzed copper. The sled as red metal in the snow. Again for hours along a highway, up against a truck, in brighter clouds, and then encroaching frost. A feeling is different each time, but that does not mean it is absent of form. I am trying not to research anything consciously, but this is also an excuse. Baby animals filter through. Dana, the earth is in pain and we can feel it. I worry we are talking about the impending ecological disaster instead of the current one. I worry we are talking about the impending ecological disaster instead of... Hello? The hello delay. I don't know to what this refers. It is perhaps a technological concept that is also a poem. I speak microphone and one appears. I tell myself I still have muscle memory for the instruments of my youth. This time, a glass rose. In one scholarly field, there's a mantra: the more produced, the fewer individual examples that survive. Another mantra of my grandmother's: what's very expensive should not bear a brand, but also such a vacancy might indicate the opposite, an opening. This next poem, a long time ago, Taylor Johnson and I took a workshop together. Taylor's going to read next. And Taylor read a poem by Phillips called Anthem, that basically I had read some Phillips before, but converted me, this reading. And there's a bee in that poem, like kind of buzzing around. And for a long time, I tried to write a poem with this bee in it, and it didn't work. And then finally, when I was writing this book, the bee sort of snuck into this poem. So in honor of that, I'm going to read this little bit from that. The bee is not like the main part of this poem, maybe, but every part of the poem is important, maybe. Can I tell you, when I'm frustrated, I sometimes hurt myself, just lightly, repeated pressure on my calf, a bluing. This is an improvement. This is the energy born forward from an anxiety, a small bee that, without belief, has entered, lost. The thin line the door fills, it separates one wall from the other, and I can feel the shifting sequoia when I pass through. I move away from food as if from fire. The air conditioner keeps me trapped. Each cardiovascular shape working more or less correctly, if with decreasing efficiency. Okay. I'm gonna read the last poem in the book. Also unplanned, like Sumita, although this is a little bit of a longer poem. But I also read it a little bit at a faster clip in some ways. So we'll see. Premonition. Same title as the first one. I put on a coat made of paper where fear lines each side. To restore old books, the paper can be split in half and reattached with a new archival center to preserve it. I don't know what can be done with circuits and wires, but imagine edges meeting just beyond my finger. I painted my nails. That's why I chose this nexus. This doesn't mean anything as a theory of gender. I am training my left hand to be as adept as my right. I cannot decide if I am larger than my skin. The most expensive thing I ever touched was a book, and somehow I was not afraid I would ruin it. As soon as I say, no one has mentioned this color, a woman comments on it. It makes me miss my friend, the geologist, whose favorite color is teal. Is it clear to you that as soon is actually indicative of a 24-hour period, give or take a few hours? That the woman holds a staff shaped like a key, and neither of us knows what kind of lock such a key opens. The poet is in my ear. Take notes, notes, yes, notes. As soon as I got back from the sequoias, I put the smoky quartz in a box and the polish back on my fingers. I prayed at each ancient for a little more magic than I had in my life. When I held out my hand to the phone, it did not fly across the room to me. The truth, I was disappointed. I am softening myself and cannot seem to distinguish this from becoming more like a child. What if hysteria is a heuristic we can use to predict the future? Not Freud. Picture Cassandra screaming unheeded, or better yet, a pop star in hysterics after bombing, as the internet tells me when I Google famous hysterics, as if these women had been recorded as individuals. These many-gendered women I feel so tender toward. When such a feeling is a bomb or a bullet crossing a gap, but what is the gap? I am afraid to go to the store alone. Each place I told a lie in, I can see clearly, as I can see my father in the chair in the middle of the room saying, no, I don't think it's a good idea, even though that chair was against the wall and I was on the stairs. My father must have said more than that. Yes, we were talking about nail polish and what was coming toward me, the man I was sure was going to launch himself across the food court. The strange space where the fear might be justified, but until it happens, it seems there's nothing to be done. What color does the sky change when a bad thing is on the horizon, but it's not a storm or a tornado? That's the color of the interval between me and the man's possible violence. I regret not submerging myself in the very cold water called Mirror Lake. I have always wanted to go through a mirror. I add this to my list. There is one day that is cool, and this reprieve makes every hot day after it seem impossible to stand. And then I saw a meteor and then two real ones in the sky. A meteor is only the action, the burning up. And the thing about them is, unless you're lucky, you only see them out of the corner of your eye. So you, like the meteor, are moving to a point of absence, just the night. Taylor Johnson is up next. Thank you guys so much for listening and for being here. Thanks, y'all.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for organizing this, HML. Pleasure to read with these poets. My name is Taylor Johnson. I'm going to read just a few poems, and they're all from my book called Inheritance that's coming out in November 10th with Alice James Books, and you can pre-order that at Alice James' website or through Women and Children First, probably, I'm sure. All right. Since I quit that internet service, I'm thinking more about the transitive properties in books, the words, the palimpsest of images accruing in my brain, but more immediately, the book in my hand, the cover worn at one end from sweat and gripping it when it comes close as in when I stood up, let one deep exhale when I came to the line of all fearless happiness from which reaches my life I sing and find it underlined by a beloved stranger. It's like turning the record over, knowing you're hearing what I'm hearing, easing up on the edge of the chair. It's like we're holding hands now at the edge of a white silence from which we are to make a music of our being here, of being moved, wherein our music complements and holds close each other's sound in the wet room of the tree I met you in. Nothing is said about the water where the fearless trees angled toward and against the light that did fall on me, made much of me, light that sings through me. So I'm singing. I forget about money, watching the clouds over 8th and Ingraham. The clouds, a rhubarb-colored ship in the sky. To my right, it all grays out. The bats emerging now from the chimneys. The bats listening for the cicada's echo. Echo is a way to create space, is a metaphor for time. Time for the cop to move along, I think, watching the cop watch me from my porch. Fuck 12. The robin on the wire vine, the wire eye competing with the bats for cicadas, the robin competing reds with the sky a money for the cicadas, a way to make space, time, the cicadas sounding out the future through repetition. A friend says to spend nothing is to keep flexibility in your hands, to keep your youth. Money, the sound of decay. Money, the repetition of waste. West 177th and Broadway. All night you eyed the man I wanted to be. My jaw flexed tight. Anger slipped into desire. Easily he would rise. Easily you would disperse pleasure made into light. What you want under him, I put on to amuse. I, your worked supplicant. Yes, love is looking away. My desire greened in your dismissal was technicolor and twilight made and never turning off. The city air hung humid above our charade. What need I could feel to transubstantiate, to unravel. Nocturne. What was rampant in me was not wisteria, perhaps decay or loss of reflection. No one like me gets old, or so I thought, even as I watched the days fade into each other. Was I no one, which phrase means a grown-up girl, mica gilded, pure myth, gone. The row might say I was trying to find the door to nothingness, that the wild was already in me. However, I walked out my bed to find my skin only to return, moon-drunk, bramble-laden, stripped to sinew, a broken syntax. No denying how I got here. I laid down among the tall grass and came up a specter. I came up everywhere. I'll just read one more. A kind of wildness descends, and across the expanse the attendant wind drones its one fecund song. When I am so tender in the thick of rot, I let all the morning wet spread a plague across this threadbare vessel that holds in what hums, what rushes beneath. Give as the ground gives. Make of me your groveling tongue, your dust, your possessed, possessing, never let up. Thank you. Lucia will be the next poet you hear.
Okay. Hi everyone. Okay, I think I'm good. Yeah, I just want to echo the poets before. Thank you so much to H. Melt and Women and Children First. I'm really thrilled to be here. I mean, I'm in my bedroom, but I'm thrilled to be on the Women and Children First virtual space. And thank you so much to the poets who have read before. It's been like amazing being able to listen and, you know, really engage with your work. So I'm just gonna read some poems from my book, Hot with the Bad Things. I have a whole stack here. My book, Hot with the Bad Things. It came out this May, also from Alice James. Yeah, definitely check out my book and check out everyone else's book on the Women and Children First website. Like H. Melt said, there's a link, I think, right here. So I'm going to read a bit from the book. I guess just a little bit of background. It's a lyric sequence of untitled prose poems. So I'll jump around, not really like in order, but just from all over the place, not chronologically. And I also thought I would do something a little bit different. Much of the book is sort of speaking back to a younger self, particularly that like 17, 18-year-old self. And a portion of the book has these, I like to call them missals, like letters, diary entries, I don't know, missals. Maybe that's like my Catholic guilt speaking. But they're written from the perspective of that 17, 18, 19-year-old girl. And so they're sort of like by design a bit cringy. But I thought I might read two first and then go into that more reflective speaker. Okay. Geneseo, New York. When he cried at the end of Good Will Hunting, I put my hand on his leg and he let me touch him. I keep writing these instructional poems like lilac my cheeks from the inside, smell your loud onion heart renaming my tongue and palms. I'm like the dove on the lawn signs by our old church. I leave peace prints. The room covered in molted feathers and white shit. A bright cooing of love, love, love. Soon. Geneseo, New York. I went and saw that girl from high school in her dorm across the campus. She was like, "Damn, Lucia," when I did some of the Nikki part of Roman's Revenge, probably because she thinks I'm a virgin. Last week, he finally did it with me, on the basement carpet, which was rough and gave me a crazy brush burn. In the poem I wrote, the body regenerates at such a pace, curdling reminders until it tries to forget for you, shed, layer, tighten. But I hope the scab on my back, big and purple as a plum, scars soon. Okay. All right, so now I'm out of the letters. One summer, I bought a plant at the farmer's market. When I took the money from my bra, the man smirked at me. I most likely killed it. A climate of fear is both counting cards and laying its hand on the table. There was a debate on campus about the semantics of no means no. Two philosophy professors in the key under a sagging hoop. Most of the women left before the Q&A. Outside the department in the smoking pen, a man chastised his friend. It's not bitches, they're females. Something grown, a sickness hollowing. I heard to pledge a girl had to hold a carrot in her vagina, tuft of greenish mud leaf. The bus driver let the girl with no money on, then told her she'd have better luck lying in the bed of a pickup truck. The jingling of an empty ambulance, the only concern with the driver is a matter of heroics. At orientation, they told us to go prone if a man put his hands on us. They laughed because they knew. Thought, if it doesn't happen to me, that's okay. I used to want the punchline at the beginning of the joke. I used to fold paper into boats, and the story that followed had to do with sinking. I had so much I wanted to say, it feels like I've forgotten it all. It's TV static or a white noise machine. It's still a seen thing. It's still noise. Little mouse, it's hard to tell if you're fearful of what, if it's your fear to be had. I see you shake, but is that your blood or the way my eyes are darting? The other day, my friend spoke beautifully on gold. I forget now, and it's just right beside me. On the bus, after he touched me, the man moved his hand to my arm, gently, sincerely, said, "I am so sorry." Okay. The mouth opens like it's just blunt entry. I want to have sex with what I want to become, says the poet. I think I should feel very broken down, very rotten. But I am open like the hull of a ship with stairs ascending. When I see a grease fire, it's a trash engine fire. It's a trash fire. It's a car engine fire. It's on the belly of a great lake. I'm always looking for a solution, but an equation would be too elegant. Siri says, "Thank you for your feedback," when you call her naughty girl. I know I shouldn't be filling any cup to splash. When I say grease fire, I mean grease fire. I tell my lover to throw me on the bed, and he refuses. What happens when you are hot with the bad things? When I was younger, I felt a tenderness that was uninterrupted. Now, when I feel it coming on, I think I know where it started. When I open, I need to know who, or when my mouth opens, it's full of fire and still so hungry. Still, I bring a strange hand to my lip and say this. I tell my friends we are so quick to forget pleasure, then we bring up poems we hate. Hate is a kind of pleasure. When people post the man and his large knife, they mention This is how many hills I was from the unlocked back door. There is an exquisite joy in climbing a hill. What can be blotted out? A man, a name, a life. I'm trying, and nothing seems to be working. Is anything lost in memoriam with a tweet? Is connection a kind of joy? I am tired and still watching. I want her alive. Point to her. Be able to see this. I want to find a younger me, tell her this. I want to write a poem that says this. Okay. All right, I think I'm going to bring it back to Orpheus. Small death, small shame. Portrait of a small room emptied. Portrait of women killing Orpheus, body small, in death, in pieces. I did not find pleasure in that. A small death. Do you feel shame when you are dead? Something always lives on, small. When you are dead, know this hand is yours. No one comes to claim it. Told me a rape is a small death. Something still lives. A blasphemous love for myself, and not dead or small. There is nothing triumphant about red rising like next day. Okay, I'm just gonna read one more. All my sticky notes have really poor sticky ability, so they're all falling out. So, here it is. Okay. A man I know posted a documentary about any campus. Hashtag rewatching. When I watched that film, I was so mad. I already knew everything they told me. Who was that for? Who are these poems for? A hashtag has an edge. Lead me out, red exit neon when the tacit applause comes. There are so many things he did to me, and I don't want to just say. My small, small self, my little warm nub. I see your dead body everywhere, flat on cement. Spread eagle and pulled to a point where your paws should be. Sometimes waterlogged and other black matted mud. It's still coming. It's still happening. Even when I step over you and look at the sky. Okay, thank you.
All right, y'all. So we have just a few minutes for a couple of questions. Everyone in the audience, feel free to drop a question in the chat if you have one. I'm going to kick it off. Taylor, I'm really excited for your forthcoming book, and particularly the idea of inheritance is something that I think each reader this evening touched on, whether it's like the inheritance of a place or the inheritance of like a particular violence or trauma, the inheritance of an idea. So I'm wondering for everyone, what is something that you've inherited that you treasure?
I'll go first if that's cool. A lot of what happens in my book, the inheritances that I talk about that are present, whether explicitly or just implicitly, are sonic inheritances, ways of speech, ways of saying things. I think it goes beyond like the people I knew around me, but also who I've read, and a lot of that's to do with, just poets, but also certain theorists. Those are all inheritances, you know what I mean?
Yeah, the funny thing for me, when I first started writing what is not remotely this book, but was thought to be at the time a first book manuscript, like 7-10 years ago or something like that. It was actually called Inheritance. And I think for me, I moved away from that because I wasn't thinking about it in this way, Melt, of inheriting something that you're happy about. I was thinking about it only as inherited trauma, you know, and that didn't end up being the story that I wanted to tell here. I think looking back, I'm going to have to make it about my race and ethnicity and cultural background. Actually, I felt alienated from them for a long time because I largely was exposed to anything South Asian through the incredibly abusive members of my family. So it felt like in moving away from that, I also had to renounce everything that they were. But I think through the process of writing this book, actually, I started to kind of think about how I could remake a whole bunch of what I was given. And one thing, it sounds weird to say that you're getting back in touch with your own sense of your cultural background, but for me, that is what it has been, and that is a thing I was given that I cherish.
Yeah, I really, yeah, I'm definitely thinking, I mean, when you mention Inheritance, Melt, my first thought is like something like very familial, and like thinking through like what has been given through like a generational inheritance, like very family focused, and even like thinking about it in like a writerly context. I definitely am like interested in what am I inheriting that I don't want, and how am I complicit in that inheritance, and how can I like grapple with it or reject it or whatever it is. And it's definitely something I'm thinking about a lot in my next project, where I'm thinking a lot through my like Sicilian heritage and that like sort of story of immigration that I think whiteness is actually a really big part of, that many of my family members just sort of ignore and don't really like to talk about. But I think it's actually really key in understanding like the progression of my family in the US. So that's like definitely something that's like fresh in front of my mind for sure.
Brooke, you having some sound trouble? If you want to type your response in the chat while we figure that out, I'm going to ask the next question we have in the little question box. Someone asked, how is your process of putting together your full length? I'd love to know details. I'd be happy for anyone to answer.
There's such a feeling of helplessness to the virtual thing, because I want to be like, let's help S. Brooke with the mic, and I can't. I'm just doing this. Anyway, to the actual question, for me, I'm a really kind of, I sit on things for a long time to make sure I'm happy with them. And with this book, it was really a journey of becoming the person who could write it more than it was a craft journey. I mean, it was also a craft journey. I learned so much between when I had the first version of this and the present day, but it was really about becoming someone who could write those early days of survivorhood in a way that confronted the parts about it that were ugly. And that took a long time for me to be able to do and hold with compassion. So I wrote and rewrote this thing for about 10 years. There were at least 7 different versions of it. And most of those versions are really only here in terms of the vestiges they left behind in what they told me about how I needed to grow. So that's not very concrete, but that really was the biggest bottom line for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I mean, process is different for everyone, of course. I think for me, this book in particular, there's no other way. I always say this, and it kind of grosses me out to even say it, but it felt like I vomited it. It felt like it was like something that like I just couldn't stop, and it almost like got in the way of things that I thought I was interested in, and it really took hold of me in that way. And it felt like something I really needed to talk about. And it was spurred on by like a particular, like I was always sort of talking about like sort of feminism at large and like thinking through gender and violence against women. But there was like a particular incident that occurred that like sparked the bulk of the book. But I will say like beyond writing, like the actual assembly of a book, and again, I'm sure this is different for a lot of people, but for me, it was totally like having good readers and having good people around me who I could like bounce ideas off of and like help me, and like even in a workshop outside of a workshop space was like really key. And I really felt like writing that, end of the book, like thank you note, acknowledgement section. I was like, I genuinely couldn't have done this without these people helping me. So yeah.
Can we hear me now? Yes, great. Okay. So maybe I'll do book first and then wind my way back briefly to Inheritance. This book was really surprising to me also for a different way than Lucia maybe, because I had never been a daily writer of any kind. I was very like, I have a thing that I'm trying to explore. And so I was trying to find language to explore it. And then I wrote most of this book on my phone in my notes app, sort of like at night before bed as I was processing like a lot of stuff that was happening. And so it was one of the things that it taught me was about like how process becomes a part of the poem in a particular way. And so that like, if you do change the process, you do change the poem. And then also if you're trying to write a poem and it's not working, like maybe that's because like you actually have to do something different to bring it out. And I had all these prose pieces and I was trying to like reshuffle them. And then I wrote like one-off poems that became the first, middle, and end poems. And those poems were the ones that helped me sort of parse how these prose chunks should fit and the kind of pattern, which is maybe obliquely tied. The inheritance question I was interested in, I was thinking about, because I was thinking about when I first was sort of thinking about how I wanted to express my gender as an adult. And so much of it was in like shapes. It wasn't like growing my hair out, or it was in, I got these like collared shawls and these kinds of flowing things, most of which I inherited from my mother, who like wears black all the time, but has these very kinds of geometric outfits. Like her whole aesthetic is built on these. She wears asymmetrical earrings, and this kind of, this kind of silhouette thing. And so one of the things that was surprising to me when I was first trying to figure out how I wanted to see myself was this kind of what I had inherited about that mode from her in a particular way, that I was like, that was the first thing I was interested in doing, was like playing with silhouette or playing with shape. I mean, I got to, nail colors too, eventually, but.
I think for me, putting this book together, I dealt with like a few years of some anxiety around like various, I guess, like police violence things that I'd experienced in this country. And a couple of years ago, I was luckily able to live in Paris for a few months. And there I was able to put this book together in a way that, I don't know, I had never felt free in this country before. So being in that city allowed me to look at my poems in a whole new way. And I was able to see this kind of, I don't know, what I'd been living inside my poems for like, 7 years at that point. And this kind of music that I had made that formed the book. I don't think I would have been able to do that had I not been, away from this country and the kind of anxiety and sadness and grief that it gives me at times.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. Do any of you have questions for each other? Like I know Taylor and Sumita, you're doing a number of readings together. So if anyone has a question for the other panelists, feel free to ask.
I have a question, which is that when I was reading, I mentioned the repetition in Sumita's poems, and I wonder if you would talk a little bit about repetition and how it works for you, because I think like so much of, well, I guess I'll let you talk, but I'm interested in how that repetition sort of works against this in regular communication, what would seem as like excess or doubled or something.
Okay, we're on. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that question. I think we could all answer it. Actually, I was really enchanted by hearing everyone's kind of mythic, incantatory rhetoric. And everyone does it so differently. So we could do a whole roundtable, an entire AWP, just us talking about repetition. Sounds better than AWP. I think for me, it serves a few purposes. One is that poetry permits a kind of dilation on a specific moment or a specific affect or mood or tone that I think is not particularly common in other forms of speech, especially daily speech. You can say, one word over and over and over and over again, and just kind of hone in on everything, all of the complexities and all of the moods and the tones of that single word. Poetry is a place where you can literally make mountains out of molehills, and often should, right? Because especially if you're thinking about a single lyric there's something just so peculiar and so strange and so intimate yet large about sharing everything that particular is consumed by. And I think there's something to that repetition really helps drive home. For me, it's also, I think I have PTSD, and so much of that is a repetition of that which is bad, just in terms of how it works as a mental illness. And I think that kind of subconsciously, this was not by any means intentional, but as I was growing the self on these pages, rewriting a different cognitive to my own head, it's also a similar kind of like memory making device that I use through the book to create the person and the worlds in there. So thank you so much for that question, and I'd honestly love to hear any and all of you talk about it.
June Jordan has this thought about rhythm, that it creates a vertical event, which I think repetition does as well within a poem. It creates like a vertical event of happening, kind of like a palpable momentum, which, allows the reader and also me as a writer to fall into this kind of new room of being with language, where language can be dissociated from, its original meaning, and then just like elevate into this vertical event of not necessarily nonsense, but just of like othering itself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so fascinated by what you're both saying right now. I guess I for me, sorry, I'm like mulling over what you're saying. For me, I think that it serves in a lot of ways as in a similar way as like a breath. It feels like both there and not there. In some cases it amplifies, but in others it almost creates like another silence for the reader, in that like it's almost fulfilling an expectation. And with that, I think I sort of I'm interested in the tension between those two things. I mean, I also feel like as I'm writing, and even when I decide like what poems to pick to read, I am thinking like, oh, right, like I talk about this a lot. And I mean, I write about this topic a lot, or this feeling, or this whatever. And for me, that repetition, I hope creates that sense for the reader of this like obsessiveness, of this like coming back to, that can be either like almost like a overwhelmingness of coming back, or sometimes you're just in it. It's like the water that moves by you, and it's both noticeable and completely unnoticeable. So that's how I'm thinking about it, I think. Sam, why don't you talk about repetition in your work?
I don't know. I mean, I asked because I think I am very intrigued and but also kind of wary in some ways, or I'm very comfortable with a certain idea of repetition, which is topical, or which is about obsession, which is like returning over and over again to a topic with like the same, with different language, like getting more out of something by returning to it. But what I was thinking about, and so I'm thinking about as we're all kind of talking, is like when a specific piece of language repeats or something, or like how that creates right, a rhythm or a vertical. That's really, I'm really interested in that idea. I'm thinking about, because Yona Harvey, who's one of my poetry teachers and Lucia's also, she uses repetition a lot in her work, and she talks about it sometimes as like, well, there's conventions to repetition too, right? Like we do things 3 times, like so frequently that has a kind of like set rhythm in us. And so she's like, so I do things 4 times, or I do them 7, or I do them 2. And I'm always like not brave enough to commit in some ways to that, about like literally just repeating something a number of times that's sort of like off kilter from the kind of constructed felt sense of how that should land, even as there are many other things about conventions of poetry that I delight in sort of playing with more. So that's what I've been thinking about.
Incredible. I'm gonna repeat the directive for you all to purchase these poetry collections. Feel free to hit that green button right at the bottom of your screen. You can go to womenandchildrenfirst.com to purchase the books. Again, they can be shipped to you wherever you are across the country. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our readers tonight, to Taylor, Sumita, Lucia, and S. Brook. Thank you all for being here and doing this reading, taking some questions. Just so everyone knows, this recording will be up on Women and Children First Crowdcast page pretty quickly after we end tonight's event. So feel free to share the link. It's the same link that you use to log in to tonight's event. And again, thank you all so much. I am feeling, really full, and really glad that I was able to hear everyone read tonight. Bye, everybody.